Whispers of the Skull Forest, a journey into darkness. Deep within the heart of a foreboding forest, where the trees seemed to whisper secrets of centuries past, stood a cemetery unlike any other. Rows upon rows of weathered tombstones, adorned with eerie symbols, marked the resting place of countless souls. But what truly set this cemetery apart was the macabre site at its center, a circle of towering stone pillars, each crowned with a skull staring hollow-eyed into the night. Legend spoke of a dark ritual performed in ages long forgotten, where the skulls of the deceased were encased in cement and bound together to form a ghastly monument. Those who dared to venture near whispered of strange whispers carried on the wind, and the sensation of unseen eyes watching from the shadows. But the horrors of the forest did not end there. Just beyond the cemetery's borders stood a dilapidated church, its once grand spires now crumbling and overgrown with ivy. Dark crosses adorned its facade, casting ominous shadows in the moonlight. Those who dared to enter the church spoke of a suffocating atmosphere, as if the very air itself was heavy with the weight of centuries-old sins. Strange symbols adorned the walls, their meaning lost to time, and the pews creaked ominously as if haunted by unseen specters. Yet, despite its foreboding appearance, something drew the curious and the foolish alike to the church's decaying doorstep. Some sought answers to questions best left unasked, while others were drawn by a morbid fascination with the unknown. Among those who dared to enter was a group of adventurers seeking to uncover the truth behind the forest's dark secrets. As they stepped through the church's rotting doors, a sense of dread washed over them, and they knew they had entered a realm where the line between the living and the dead blurred. Their footsteps echoed through the empty nave as they made their way toward the altar, where a single candle flickered in the darkness. But as they drew closer, they felt a presence stirring in the shadows, a malevolent force that hungered for their souls. With each step, the air grew colder, and the whispers grew louder, until they could no longer distinguish reality from nightmare. Shadows danced along the walls, and the crosses seemed to twist and contort, as if possessed by some unseen force. And then, with a sudden and terrifying roar, the darkness erupted into a frenzy of screams and madness. The adventurers fought desperately to escape, their cries echoing through the empty church as they fled into the night. But as they stumbled out into the moonlit forest, they knew that they had only scratched the surface of the horrors that lurked within. For in the depths of the dark forest, where the trees whispered secrets of centuries past, the cemetery of skulls and the mysterious church stood as silent sentinels, guarding their secrets for all eternity. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. The Devil's Monastery. Deep within a forgotten forest, the ruins of St. Oradia's monastery lay shrouded in darkness and whispered secrets. Villagers spoke of eerie disturbances emanating from the decaying site, prompting the church to send Father Michael, a devout priest, to investigate. Armed with only his faith and a silver crucifix, Father Michael ventured into the desolate monastery. The deeper he went, the colder and more oppressive the air became. Guided by an unseen force, he discovered a hidden staircase beneath the altar, leading to a chamber bathed in an eerie red glow. In the center of the chamber lay the abyssal seal, a relic said to imprison the damned. As Father Michael approached, the seal cracked open, and a figure emerged. Lucifer, the morning star. His eyes burned with an unholy fire as he taunted the priest. "You have come to release me." Clutching his crucifix, Father Michael recited prayers with desperation. Lucifer laughed, summoning visions of hellfire and torment. Yet Father Michael clung to his faith, chanting an ancient prayer of divine intervention. The chamber shook violently as the abyssal seal glowed brighter. Lucifer screamed in rage, his form flickering before being sucked back into the abyss. The seal closed, and silence fell. Exhausted, Father Michael emerged into the dawn light, knowing the battle was won, but the war far from over. The villagers hailed his bravery, but only he understood the true horror that lay beneath the ruins, waiting for the day it would rise again. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. Witch's Curse Unleashed. In the heart of the decrepit town, beyond the reach of sunlight, stood an old abandoned manor. Legend had it that a witch lived there, an old crone with a twisted smile and eyes that gleamed like polished obsidian. The townsfolk whispered her name only in hushed tones, Isolde. One stormy night, a curious young woman named Eliza ventured into the manor, lured by the promise of hidden treasures that Isolde was rumored to guard. As the howling wind and driving rain enveloped her, she pushed open the heavy wooden door. It creaked open on its own, inviting her into the darkness. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay and the flickering glow of candles. Strange symbols were etched into the walls, and jars filled with grotesque specimens lined the shelves. Eliza's breath caught in her throat as she took a step forward, her foot crunching on something brittle. She looked down to see a scattered array of tiny bones. Suddenly, a chilling voice echoed through the manor. "Welcome, child. I've been expecting you." Eliza turned to see Isolde standing in the shadows, her twisted smile revealing teeth that were unnaturally sharp. The witch's eyes glowed with a malevolent light as she raised a gnarled hand. In an instant, the room seemed to close in around Eliza, the walls pulsating with a sinister energy. Isolde's voice was a whisper that slithered into Eliza's mind. "You seek treasures, but all you'll find here is your doom." Eliza tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. The witch began to chant in a language older than time, and Eliza felt her body stiffen, her skin turning cold as ice. She looked down to see her fingers elongating, her nails growing into sharp talons. Her reflection in a cracked mirror showed her transformation into a grotesque creature, half human, half beast. With a final, haunting laugh, Isolde vanished, leaving Eliza trapped in the manor, her mind filled with an insatiable hunger. From that night on, the townsfolk spoke of the creature that roamed the manor, its eyes gleaming with a terrible intelligence. They knew it was Eliza, cursed to forever guard the witch's secrets, an eternal reminder of Isolde's dark power. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. The Laughing Shadows, the Curse of Chuckles the Clown. In the small town of Hollow Brook, the arrival of the traveling circus was always the highlight of the year. The town's residents eagerly awaited the spectacle of acrobats, exotic animals, and dazzling performances. This year was no different, and excitement buzzed through the air as the circus set up its grand tent on the outskirts of town. Among the circus performers was a clown named Chuckles, known for his wide, eerie grin, painted in crimson, and his garish, mismatched costume. Chuckles had a special act that always left the audience in stitches, both from laughter and from the sheer terror that his macabre humor could evoke. His performance was the stuff of nightmares, but people couldn't look away. What the townspeople didn't know was that Chuckles had a dark past. Years ago, he had been a renowned performer in a famous circus until a tragic accident claimed the lives of several fellow performers. The incident was shrouded in mystery, with whispers of foul play. Chuckles vanished soon after, only to resurface in Hollow Brook's lesser-known traveling circus. The first night of the performance, the big top was packed. Chuckles took the stage with his usual antics, juggling knives and pulling grotesque faces. The audience laughed uneasily, the fear mingling with their amusement. As the night went on, Chuckles' act grew darker, his jokes more sinister. But the townspeople, caught up in the thrill of the circus, didn't notice the glint of madness in his eyes. After the show, a group of teenagers decided to sneak into the circus grounds. They laughed and dared each other to go into the performers' tents. When they stumbled upon Chuckles' tent, they found it filled with bizarre and horrifying trinkets, shrunken heads, bones, and old photographs of the tragic accident that had marred Chuckles' past. Suddenly, The tent flap rustled, and Chuckles stood at the entrance, his grin wider and more menacing than ever. Before they could react, the clown lunged at them with surprising speed. The screams of the teenagers were swallowed by the night as Chuckles took his revenge for the curiosity that had invaded his sanctuary. The next morning, the townspeople noticed the teenagers were missing. The excitement of the circus distracted them. As days passed, more people began to vanish. Whispers of a curse spread through Hollow Brook. The circus, now an object of suspicion, decided to pack up and leave, but not before one final performance. On the last night, the tent was filled with a palpable sense of dread. Chuckles took the stage, his performance even more disturbing than before. The audience watched in horrified fascination as he juggled knives, each one gleaming in the dim light. The finale was a mock execution, with Chuckles as the executioner. As the guillotine blade fell, a collective gasp echoed through the tent. After the show, Chuckles disappeared along with the circus, leaving behind a trail of bodies. The town of Hollow Brook was never the same. The legend of the killer clown became a cautionary tale, a warning to those who dared to laugh in the face of true terror. Years later, on the anniversary of the circus's visit, people would claim to hear Chuckles' maniacal laughter echoing through the forest. He whispered that his spirit still wandered, seeking revenge on those who mocked his pain and suffering, forever haunting the town that had once welcomed him with open arms.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.
The Haunting of Isabella, the Cursed Doll. In a small town, an antique shop held a porcelain doll named Isabella, whose innocent appearance belied the malevolent entity within. Alice and Mark, seeking a birthday gift for their daughter Lily, purchased Isabella, unaware of the terror they were bringing home. From the moment Isabella entered their house, eerie occurrences began. Objects moved, whispers filled the night, and Lily had nightmares of a hollow-eyed woman. Dismissing these as childish fears, Alice and Mark soon realized the truth when Lily started acting strangely, seemingly controlled by the doll. Desperate, they called Father Daniel, a priest experienced with the supernatural. He sensed the evil within Isabella and began an exorcism. As he chanted, Isabella's eyes turned black, and the house shook with a malevolent force. Finally, with a powerful prayer, the entity was banished, and Isabella became an ordinary doll. Father Daniel locked Isabella in a sacred chest, hoping to contain the evil forever. Yet as years passed, a faint, sinister laugh sometimes echoed from the chest, hinting that Isabella's darkness was not entirely vanquished.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.
The Wailing Convent. Chapter 1. The Arrival. The bus trundled through the winding roads of the remote countryside, jostling as it passed over uneven terrain. Amy Spencer, a young historian, clutched her notebook, feeling the vibrations through her fingertips. She gazed out the window at the dense woods, which seemed to close in around the bus as it neared its destination, St. Mary's Convent. Amy was researching an obscure piece of local lore about a demonic nun said to haunt the old convent. The story had intrigued her, a bizarre anomaly in the history of the otherwise devout order. The convent, abandoned for decades, was now a dilapidated shell. Rumors of the nun, Sister Agnes, had persisted through the generations, tales of her malevolence growing more sinister with each retelling. The bus driver, a grizzled man who had seen many a curious soul come and go, shot Amy a concerned glance as they approached the convent. "Miss, are you sure about this? That place? It ain't right," he warned, his voice gravelly and uneasy. Amy forced a smile. "I'll be fine. It's just a story after all." The bus came to a halt at the edge of a narrow path leading up to the convent. As Amy stepped off, she felt an icy wind whip around her, making her shiver despite the mild weather. The driver watched her as she started up the path, shaking his head before driving away, leaving her in unsettling silence. The convent loomed ahead, its once white walls now cracked and covered in creeping vines. The Gothic architecture, once a beacon of faith and piety, now stood as a decaying testament to time's cruel passage. A tall, wrought-iron gate, hanging loosely on its hinges, creaked ominously as Amy pushed it open. Inside, the courtyard was overgrown with weeds. Statues of saints stood in solemn watch, their stone faces eroded, eyes seemingly following her every step. Amy couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. She reached the main entrance and found the door slightly ajar. Gathering her courage, she pushed it open and stepped inside. Chapter 2. The First Night. The interior of the convent was dark and musty. Dust particles danced in the faint light filtering through broken stained glass windows. Amy flicked on her flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay. She made her way through the main hall, her footsteps echoing loudly. As she explored, she couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. She discovered an old chapel at the heart of the convent, its altar draped in cobwebs and rows of rotting pews leading up to it. The centerpiece was a large crucifix, the figure of Christ hanging forlornly, his eyes fixed on some distant point. Amy set up her makeshift camp in a small room adjacent to the chapel. As darkness fell, she lit a few candles, their flickering light casting eerie shadows on the walls. She pulled out her notes and began reading the accounts of Sister Agnes, trying to make sense of the conflicting stories. According to legend, Sister Agnes had been a beloved nun known for her kindness and devotion. However, something had changed her. One night, the other nuns found her in the chapel, eyes wild, chanting in a language they couldn't understand. She claimed to have visions of demons and hellfire. When they tried to restrain her, she fought back with unnatural strength, cursing them in demonic voices. Eventually, they locked her away in a cell in the basement, where she perished under mysterious circumstances. Her spirit, it was said, never left the convent, corrupted by the evil that had taken hold of her. Amy felt a chill run down her spine as she read. A sudden gust of wind extinguished her candles, plunging her into darkness. She fumbled for her flashlight and flicked it on, the beam catching a fleeting shadow on the far wall. Her heart pounded as she scanned the room, but found nothing. Just her imagination, she told herself. But the uneasy feeling lingered. She decided to call it a night, hoping that sleep would come despite the oppressive atmosphere. Amy awoke to a cold draft and the distant sound of whispering. She sat up, listening intently. The whispers grew louder, though she couldn't discern the words. It was coming from the chapel. Trembling, she grabbed her flashlight and cautiously opened the door. The chapel was bathed in a ghostly light. The crucifix seemed to glow faintly, casting long, twisted shadows. As she approached, the whispers stopped abruptly. She felt a presence behind her and whirled around, but saw only the empty room. Amy's gaze fell upon the altar, where a dusty, leather-bound book now lay. She was certain it hadn't been there before. She reached out and touched it, recoiling as the cold leather sent a shock through her fingers. The book fell open to a page covered in strange symbols and a faded sketch of a nun with hollow eyes. Chapter 3. The Book of Curses. Amy's hands trembled as she examined the book. The symbols on the page were unlike any language she had ever seen. The sketch of the nun was unnervingly detailed, capturing a look of malevolent glee on her face. A name was scrawled beneath the sketch. Sister Agnes. Determined to uncover more, Amy flipped through the book, discovering it to be a diary of sorts, filled with entries in a cryptic script interspersed with Latin phrases. Despite her fear, she felt a thrill of excitement at the potential discovery. She read aloud one of the Latin passages, translating with her limited knowledge. In tenebris, animam suam perdere, per malum perpetuo tenebitur. In darkness, her soul is lost. Through evil, she is eternally bound. A sudden piercing shriek filled the chapel, echoing off the walls. Amy clapped her hands over her ears, her heart racing. The sound faded as quickly as it had come, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. She looked around, terrified, but saw nothing. She backed out of the chapel, clutching the book to her chest, and returned to her makeshift camp. Sleep was impossible now. The events of the night had her on edge. She spent the rest of the night reading the book, trying to decipher its contents. As dawn broke, Amy's eyes were heavy with exhaustion. She had made some sense of the book's entries. They spoke of rituals and dark ceremonies, of summoning demons and binding spirits. The diary seemed to chronicle Sister Agnes's descent into madness and her eventual pact with a demonic entity. Amy's stomach churned as she realized the implications. Sister Agnes hadn't been merely possessed. She had willingly embraced the darkness, becoming a vessel for the demonic force that now haunted the convent. The whispers, the shadows, they were remnants of her cursed soul, trapped between worlds. Determined to put an end to the haunting, Amy formulated a plan. She would find the cell where Sister Agnes had died and perform a cleansing ritual, hoping to release her tormented spirit. Chapter 4. The Descent. Armed with the book and a resolve born of fear and determination, Amy descended into the bowels of the convent. The stairs leading to the basement were steep and treacherous, the air growing colder with each step. Her flashlight flickered, casting jittery beams across the walls. The basement was a labyrinth of narrow corridors and damp stone cells. Water dripped from the ceiling, echoing ominously in the silence. Amy moved cautiously, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The atmosphere was oppressive, as if the very air was thick with malevolence. She finally found the cell described in the book. Its door hung ajar, the iron bars rusted and bent. Steeling herself, she stepped inside. The cell was small and barren, save for a crude wooden cross nailed to the far wall. The floor was covered in ancient dried blood, and scratch marks marred the stone walls. Amy set the book on the floor and opened it to a page describing a banishment ritual. She arranged candles in a circle and began chanting the Latin incantation, her voice trembling. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to close in around her. As she completed the chant, a low growl resonated through the cell. The temperature plummeted, and Amy's breath came out in visible puffs. She felt a presence behind her and turned to see a figure materializing in the doorway. It was Sister Agnes, her face twisted in a rictus of fury. Her eyes were hollow pits, and her mouth moved in a silent scream. Amy stumbled backward, her heart pounding in her chest. The nun advanced, her form becoming more solid, her expression one of pure malevolence. Desperate, Amy picked up the book and resumed the chant, her voice rising in pitch. The nun stopped, her form flickering. She let out an unearthly wail, her figure disintegrating into a swirl of black smoke that filled the cell. Amy fell to her knees, gasping for breath. The air cleared and the cell was silent once more. The oppressive weight lifted, replaced by a sense of calm. The ritual had worked. Sister Agnes's spirit had been banished. Chapter 5. The revelation exhausted but relieved, Amy gathered her belongings and made her way back to the surface. The morning sun was bright, the convent no longer shrouded in shadows. She felt a sense of accomplishment, having rid the place of its haunting presence. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.